but they obviously other things.
Zoom meeting. Got it. Button.
Right, you probably heard my screen reader. So also welcome to Jeremy. I've invited Jeremy. He's a real big fish in disability, and I'm so glad that he can be here with me to hold my hand as we discuss low vision today. So without realizing it, we didn't know it was World Sight Day today. So just seems appropriate that we talk about vision. And so for those of you who haven't read my bio or don't know too much about me, I've had visual impairment from Stargardt's disease for over 45 years and decided in the last few years, what can I do with my life with this visual impairment and how can I turn it for good in some way? So started with a product, landed up bringing it to market, and then landed up in the consulting space by default. So here I am, loving the journey and trying to find ways, how do we contribute? How do we get the message out there that there's a lot more people with low vision than the stats say? And how do we get to grips with that? So as we talk about inclusion today, yeah, Jeremy, over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Jen, and it's good to be here, and hello, everybody. Yeah, so I think it's a wonderful, it's either an irony or a compliment saying it's World Sight Day today, but I guess we do feature because we do have a little bit of sight left, you possibly more than I. Yes, so I've got retinitis pigmentosa, and I also have, well, when I was a boy, I had a very, very poor or very distinct myopia. And so I've had low vision all my life. And it's a degenerative condition. And so now in my late 50s, it's almost entirely gone. And so I'm a disability inclusion consultant, and I have been so for the last 22 years. Before that, for the previous 10 in my career, I was conventionally employed in the area of marketing and sales in the human resource field. And then in 1999, I switched somewhat to work on my own consulting, specifically with, and I became self-employed, specifically to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and disability inclusion specifically. And as I said, that's what I've been doing for the last 2 decades.
Brilliant. So today what we're going to do is, first up, we're going to try and put a definition to what low vision is. So Jeremy and I will discuss that a little bit, and then we're going to stop after a couple of minutes, after about 10-15 minutes, for some questions. And you're welcome to put in the chat. If there are people who struggle to use the chat because you're visually impaired, you're also welcome in that time to raise your hand, and Rian will spot that. And then we're going to go on to talk about inclusion. In that moment, you'll see Jeremy will head towards his human resources employment side, and I'll probably head towards digital inclusion, which is my passion. And yeah, and then we will stop for some questions at about 1:45 from there. So that's the layout for today. So Jeremy, let's start with you. If you had to define low vision, how would you explain it to someone who knows nothing about it?
Thanks, Jen. That's a nice loaded question for the very first question of the day, because frankly, it's a very difficult thing to actually define. The words themselves should be sufficient: low vision. But what amazes me is how difficult people find that concept, and they really struggle with the idea that vision isn't measured in binary, or in a binary sense of either you do or you don't. And so low vision is quite literally somebody whose vision is not optimal. So we could go and look into the clinical definition of low vision, which is somebody with 6/20. So in other words, what they see at 20 meters, we more or less see at 6. And then within that, they also have a field and a degree, a field of vision in degrees. Now, that's all very well. And then in blindness, obviously, it's a more severe measurement. Now, that's all very well, but there are a myriad permutations, in my view, of low vision, frankly. Everybody's got a slightly different. So for instance, I've got RP, and classic RP, as many of the clinicians will tell you, means you have tunnel vision. I've never had tunnel vision in my life, but the genes tell me I have RP. And so low vision is it's a moving feast. We can elaborate on that a little bit. So I know I probably haven't given much clinical definition, but I don't believe that that's wise. In fact, I think we need to be a lot more open-minded about the definition. What about you?
Yeah, for me, the way I describe it is really confusing vision. It's the time from when the ophthalmologist or the optician says, there's no more we can do for you with spectacles. And it's kind of that journey somewhere between the medical field and then, towards blindness. And as you say, it's not an on-off switch. It's not even a dimmer switch. If I took a ruler and we could measure it, at 0 is fully sighted and at 30 centimeters it is blind. Low vision falls somewhere on that scale, but it's not linear. So what I have found quite useful is taking a pair of spectacles, and everyone can damage a pair of spectacles. They get scratched, or you can put some hand cream on it and dip it into your morning oats before you cook it, and something will stick, and then you put that on. And so when you're trying to explain low vision to a sighted person, I found it quite useful to kind of make an experience for people. So I've got one friend, and it's almost like a wagon wheel landed in his eyeball. So then, he sees through the spokes of a wheel.
Wow.
Yeah. And others have sort of like a Charles Bonnet syndrome, where you actually land up seeing images and you think you're mentally strange, but you're starting to see figures and faces as your mind makes up shapes. So I think, with low vision, some of it is also not to do with your eyesight per se, but it's to do with your visual perception, if you've got some light perception, or even to do with, you've got your cortical blindnesses as well, which is to do with how your brain processes images or how the optic nerve takes that. So, in a short version, layman's term, I say it's buggered up eyesight. So I know that's not very clinically correct, but I think
eyes are broken. I always say my eyes are broken.
Yeah, they're not quite working well. So it's kind of an academic way to say it.
The trouble is, when you say things like eyes are broken, a lot of the sort of more politically correct, academic-y type people might cringe at the thought. And I know there are disabilities who don't actually like it when you refer to an impairment that is damaged or broken or substandard or defective, and they get quite prickly about it. And I'm a lot more pragmatic, and I think it's about trying to appreciate. There've been books. Sally Field, a famous woman in the 60s, wrote several books about this, and she had low vision, and she was saying things like how tiring it is when people say, "So how much can you see?" Now, if you think about that little sentence, it's got to be the most stupid question on earth. How much can you see? Well, that's ridiculous. Because if you don't know what perfect sight is and you've never experienced it, that's a silly question. And she often said that, people often said, well, when asked that question, they would say, "Can you see this?" And in desperation, they eventually say, yeah, okay. So they would sort of lie. So lately I've been asked this quite often to try and explain the trajectory. If a vision descent can be called a trajectory, to try and explain it in my terms. And so when I was a boy, I could ride a bicycle, but I could never have aspired to ride a car or drive a car. I could read large print, but I would never have been able to read newsprint or a telephone book. We live in Cape Town, you and I, and we have a great big beautiful mountain, which is, it's just, you can't miss it. It's 3,600 foot high, and it dominates the skyline. And I could see the mountain as a boy. In fact, I could see the mountain as a young man, but I would never have been able to see the features on the mountain, the waterfalls and the rock formations and even buildings like the university and that sort of thing. And it's actually interesting because as the visual acuity descends, or diminishes, I find it quite a loss. So for instance, last year was the last time I could see the mountain. And one day I was looking and it just wasn't there. Like somebody had stolen the mountain. It just literally wasn't there. It's gone. And so after 58 years, I've lost my friend. It's actually quite sad. But so we must just appreciate. And I think the lesson in this webinar is that we've got to tell people to really try and get a handle on being less definitive, or trying to be less definitive and less binary around the visual thing. This is a moving feast. Eh?
Yeah. Look, and
Can I
think
just
it's a
quickly
difficult
interrupt, Jen?
Yes.
When you came back from fetching water, your positioning is not as perfect as it was. So we have diminishing sight of you. That's
you got low
perfect.
vision. Okay.
And when
Is low vision when I put the camera really low? Was it right, Rian?
Yeah, okay, so you went back the wrong way. So just tilt it again. You at the bottom of the screen right now. Little bit more. Okay, that's perfect, because when you talk with your hands, we can now fully see that. Okay.
Providing you can see it.
Well, you can see it, so I'm so glad. And I've got some fiddling clay here, because I don't know about anyone. I know there's someone else on the screen who picks their nails like I do, shreds our hands because we can't see. And when you're trying to focus on where you're meant to be looking, I've got central vision loss, so I've got some peripheral clues. But I find it quite tiring trying to focus into the camera because it's not there. So hence the fiddle, to get some fiddle spinners going on. So I think the aspect of low vision that we were talking about it is that also it's difficult to describe because everyone experiences it differently. I'm very grateful that there are academics who are going, who are following this. But there are also some aspects of vision where people have perfect sight, but they're perhaps missing, sort of they've got some color blindness going on, some other form of blindness, or even dyslexia. I know it's not low vision, but many of the things when we get to inclusion, dyslexia used to be called reading blindness because the letters would jump all over the page. And so I think when we're looking at something like low vision, it falls in between I'm just struggling to process information, like sort of a sensory processing disorder, and then something more specific, which is a disability. I also think in the process that people are new to low vision, particularly in the senior years, they don't see low vision as a disability because that's to do with your identity. And as you say, Jeremy, there's a grief involved where you've got to go through the cycle of grief before you can accept that you have a problem with your vision. I used to say, I'm not blind, I just can't see.
Yeah.
And I can't see well. And so there's a whole identity issue. There's emotions that go around talking about low vision. I know jokingly I say, is that people who keep their eyes lower in their face? Yeah, what is this low vision?
So I was just thinking when you were saying that now, is that the something that isn't really spoken about enough is trajectory, is the fact that this is moving, the fact that it's not a static thing. I don't know a single person with low vision that hasn't lost some of their vision in that time, or in the time that I've known them, or in their expected trajectory of vision loss. And this is something that I mean, must remember who this webinar is for. We're not actually speaking to the converted, even though we have some of the converted in the room. The fact is that this is meant for people to educate, that we must appreciate that this is not a static thing. And Michelle Buerter and I did a very interesting webinar a while ago where we discussed this one in the work context, where we discussed the real problems associated with the loss of vision in a trajectory, over a time.
Yes.
And they mustn't think that it's static. It's really important to appreciate that for the most part there will be diminishing vision, which makes it hard for both the person observing and the individual themselves, because I've got a blind friend who's been blind all his life. I mean, in fact, he was born without eyeballs. So he quite literally has never seen a thing in his life. And we've been friends for many years. And he was saying, you know, I wish for you that you would lose your vision so that you could just concentrate on blindness rather than having to accommodate and constantly change your views and change your perceptions around diminished vision. And it was very interesting. It was quite a mature thing to say, I thought.
And I think it's very useful for people to know that. I think also, you know, how to explain. So I've got a lot of compassion for designers of spaces, digital and physical spaces, because low vision is so confusing, and the stats around it are very murky. It's difficult to know how to begin designing for people who have different types of visual processing. Yeah, so as you say, it is a moving target, it is a beast, but there are some principles that one can then use that to try and cover all the bases.
So I think before we get on, we're going to have a little break in a second so that we can look at questions if there are any. But I think before we get on to the design thing, I think we need to just a little bit, literally for a minute or two, discuss, you know, examples of what it's like. Maybe perhaps we can even think of funny anecdotes of what it's like, you know, to live life with vision that isn't actually optimal. I mean, I always think of an incident with me, and it was a long time ago. It was a good 25 years ago. And I agreed to meet somebody in a restaurant. And I said, no, worry, I'll find you. She, you know, because she said, no, I'll look out for you. And I said, no, worry, I'll see you. It was a classic blindism, a classic overcompensation, where all I should have said was, sure, look for me. But because she had very big hair, she had enormous hairstyle, and I figured I'd be able to see her. And I went into this restaurant looking for her, peering at all the people in the banquettes down the middle aisle, and there were banquettes on either side, looking at the benches to see if I could find my friend's big hair. And I hadn't found it for a while, and I'm going through the restaurant, and suddenly I perceived, out of the corner of my eye, I perceived a movement dead ahead of me. And I stopped dead. One thing about we as blind people or visually impaired people know is, boy, we've got great brakes. And I jammed on my brakes, and I saw this man standing in front of me, and I could see it was a man, more or less. And I stepped aside, and he stepped aside. And I stepped aside, and he stepped aside. And I was just about to get angry and say, what are you doing? And I looked forward, and it turned out it was me, because the entire back of the restaurant was a mirror. And so it was things like that, which is what made me start thinking that I needed to grow up a little and embrace low vision more and start using it and be taught to use a cane, for instance. What about you?
That's a big
what sort of things happen to you?
That's a big one, picking up a cane, because once you pick up a cane, you suddenly have everybody's, you know, it feels like you're walking in public. And so the public have permission to make a judgment on who they think you are. So for me, picking up a white cane is a big identity crisis in many ways. I spent 40 years running away from this. Actually, I was an athlete, because with Stargardt, you lose your central vision first. So running and moving fast was safer for me than stopping and looking. So I was just fast. And then, but what would happen, I'd run the race, I'd come in first, and then they've got these little chutes where they say like senior girls or junior girls or whatever. And I wouldn't know which chute to run into. Is it boys or is it girls? Unless I was following someone, you know, I didn't know where to go. And then they'd say, but you're not a senior boy. It's like, no, I'm not. So it's getting over some of those funny things. And that's where I learned to follow colors. So when I take take public transport, I will follow clothes, or find a bright bag and I'll follow the yellow bag in the direction, as long as it's going in the direction I want to go in. So I think we find little clues in the environment to help us to look normal, whatever normal is. Someone said normal is sitting on your tumble dryer. So I thought that was quite fun.
Normal.
Jeremy, you need to say something, because I need to cough.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, there we go. Oh, that was attractive. Thank you for that. So when did you do use a cane somewhat, or sometimes, I think, Jen?
Yes, I do. I've got over myself, and my cane really gives me a lot of stability and security as well. I know some people feel more vulnerable with a cane, but getting white cane skills is very good. I now walk by myself in the morning. I use the trees as navigation because generally there are no steps on the road. Well, not in the northern suburbs. I think it's different in other places. Yeah, and I've slowly get to realize, oh, the tree roots are going to bother me at this place or that place. So yeah, I do. Since I've picked up my white cane, I've been a lot more independent on public transport because people can see what's wrong.
Yeah.
And I've found the public incredibly helpful. It gives me permission to ask stupid questions like, on these glass windows, where is the door?
Yeah, exactly.
I usually follow, I can see mats. So mats matter to me. If I can find a mat and walk in the middle of it, aim my cane to the middle of the mat, that's usually a door, but not always. So that leads to embarrassing situations at times.
Yeah, I'm thinking, so I started using a cane about 25 years ago. No, not quite, 24 years ago. And then for the last 15 years, I've been using a dog. Until absolutely very recently. In fact, that has opened up a whole new dilemma for me, because after 15 years of using 3 guide dogs, you know, as you know, my guide dog passed away last Monday, which was an enormous shock. But you know, and apart from the loss of this glorious animal that helps you, and as a family member, you know, there's the whole question of independence. And what this means is I'm going to have to now brush up my cane skills. I mean, I use a cane when I don't use the dog, but never to the degree that I use the dog. I mean, I take the dog to the shops, or rather he takes me to the shops, or the chemist, or friends, or, you know, the multiple places that I walk to with the dog. And the thought of going to those places, which are far away, some of them are 2-3 kilometers away, with a cane makes me want to burst into tears, actually, because I know it will be slower. Because with the dog, I could move fast, you know, at about 6 kilometers an hour. So that's going to be an interesting one. And but I wanted to go back to something you said, and I think it's really important for people to understand. Is this the problem that people with low vision have in embracing using a cane? It's so common, it's a trope, it's a real thing that that people resist the cane, and there's all sorts of baggage around that. It's their own esteem, it's their own feelings of vulnerability, it's embarrassment, it's perceptions of how people will look at you. I mean, I joke that I moved house in order to use a cane. I got taught a cane in one house and then moved houses to another neighborhood 3 kilometers up the road. And I joke that it was so that no one would see me. No one would recognize me from my old neighborhood. So, but the lengths people go to avoid using a cane. And I always urge people with low vision, actually, to really grab it, actually, and not resist it as much. Huh?
Yeah. I wrote an article called Cain and Abel, and I wasn't talking about the miscreant brothers in the Bible, but you know, just the ability. And I had some, you know, it was a life changer to me.
Hey, only one of the brothers was miscreant.
Yes, exactly.
The surviving one.
Yes, exactly. So anyway,
maybe I can jump in here.
Rion, yes.
Yes.
Thanks,
sorry. It's 28 minutes past the hour. And and I think if we need if we're going to have questions, people need to start adding them quickly. We've had some chat in the chat box, but let's just start with this question. This is about inclusion. This is about accessibility. And could you guys give us some insight on how does the public perception of being blind affect accessibility? I think there's a lack of awareness out there. So how does the public perception of being blind affect accessibility?
Well, I know I could answer that, Jen, but it's your show. Do you want to answer that?
No, you go for it, Jeremy.
I think it's a really good question, and it goes to the heart of inaccessibility, and is that we have to broaden our scope here to embrace conventional disabilities as well, is that public's perception of disability has been so jaded and so narrow-minded and so blurred, really, that is the reason we have the inaccessibility that we do. It's because people simply don't consider, and there's a reason for that, is because they simply don't get exposed to as many people with disabilities, and in this case, low vision, as they ought to. And when they are exposed, they're confused. And so if we had greater, that's where the DEI acronym is so important, because the I, inclusion, to my mind, is the driver. And is the really important thing, inclusion. You can have diversity, you can have equity, but it doesn't mean anything. Inclusion is where it fits into society. And because we've been excluded for so long, that the society has just no clue what to make of this thing. And you know that old saying about out of sight, out of mind. And because we are, in a sense, out of sight, when you plan things, design things, plan to build things, the last thing you think about is accessibility. And so that's our greatest, that's why we need to see far greater inclusion at every level. Jen?
I also think, as we are going into this area of inclusion, opening up that side of the topic, it's looking at what people perceive a person with a visual impairment can and can't do. So, to say, well, I'm designing this, people don't think that visually impaired people would want to do that. And so, as you know, I've been rather a little bit outspoken on some of the banking accessibility, the activities of daily living now as we go into the digital space, which is largely visual, the online space, that people are not thinking, but can blind people even do this? Why would they want to be banking? Surely you can't do that. And I think that perception, even though it's not stated specifically, it's important, I think, that we overcome that. And as people with visual impairment, to also have some compassion for people who are really unaware. I think that lack of awareness is a form of blindness as well. So how do we treat that kind of lack of awareness, blindness, in the same way as we would like to be treated as we enter into this stage?
Well, it's true. And I think that the temptation to be short with and sometimes angry with is quite strong. And that's unfortunate. And there's a lesson for all people with disabilities, is to lighten up a little, and not actually allow yourself to get too angry and frustrated. Rion, were there any comments, if not questions?
Yes, we have more questions. They are coming in now at quite a speed. So you guys need to answer quick and to the point.
All right.
Okay.
So
Yes,
Asma asked, please could you give us tips on simple home modifications for low vision? Tips.
That'll come up next. We'll deal with that.
I think that'll be a whole nother sort of webinar we can do, but we're going to look on some of those principles for inclusion now. So we're going to get to that in our discussion.
Okay, and then from Erica, I'm wondering whether the clinical description of low vision / blindness limits some people from visually impaired, from obtaining services. For example, people with 820 vision have more vision than clinical 620, but perhaps the impact of that impairment is greater than the impact of 620 on someone else.
Very clever. Great question, Erica.
It's a good question. And I think that's where awareness generally, when we're looking at designing for all, we need to realize that it's actually for everyone. When we're looking at inclusion in terms of design, which is my passion, you'll start to see that if it's useful for people with low vision, most people will be able to access that. And I think that's where the problem, when you have things that are specifically designed for low vision, why don't we just make design for all people?
Well, that's what universal access is. I mean, the principle of universal access is everybody benefits. So you don't have to make special things for so-and-so and so-and-so. But I think to Erica's point is that I think we can simply agree that to try and confine and define low vision in such a very, very, very narrow little clinical explanation is simply inadequate. I have seen much wider, far more complex definitions as well. But they are beyond the reach of most people who aren't clinically trained. I certainly couldn't make head or tail out of a more detailed explanation, which means you've got a real problem. So on the one hand, you've got an inadequate definition. On the other hand, you've got far too much complexity to be able to be understandable. And so I think we need to somehow find a way to embrace the idea that some people are simply low visioned without having, because the permutations, as Erica pointed out, are so wide. I mean, I know people, for instance, who have really good vision during the day, and yet they're totally night blind. On the other hand, I've known people with tunnel vision to drive. Quite a lot of RP people who have tunnel vision, in fact, drive, which I think is a little risky. And I'm pretty gutsy. So, so that confuses people terribly. You know, on the one.
Yeah, I think it's like that situation where you get someone walking with a guide dog, and they'll sit at the bus shelter and take out a book to read, and yet people say, I thought you were blind, but there's mobility issues. And then the other side where for me, I was like running around, central vision loss, and then but I can't see my hands, or can't see money or my phone or whatever. So it's a very confusing large topic, but and
I think there's another question, Jim.
Process.
I think there's another question. Rian,
yes, there's a question. There's a question from Trevor. I have RP as well. Kindly share with me tips on taking care of my eyes with the little vision left. So he wants to take care of his eyes.
Right. I think without. Yeah, because that's once again quite a long, Trevor, the definite advice I would give you is to, and you probably are a member of the RP Foundation, or RP, Retina South Africa. It used to be called the RP Foundation, sorry, Retina South Africa. Claudette Metterfant, if she's not in the room, in fact, is to make contact with them. If you don't know how to reach them, then we can organize that. But Claudette and others in that fraternity have a great deal of clinical advice about eye care. So yes, I would definitely have a chat to them. I know the one thing I would say is careful about glare, in terms of wearing sunnies and wearing hats and things, because you can tough guy the glare to an extent, but you really do damage. But there are medicinal and dietary advice that they give freely. Have you got any advice, Jen?
Yeah, I think that's to connect in with an organization. There are organizations and support groups in most of the towns in South Africa. So to also get connected in to find out some of these tips and tricks, but also for the emotional support, because it's not fun losing your vision.
It's true, actually. That is important. Rian, are there any other comments or questions?
There's a comment from Lorenzo Andrews. He's from the Department of the Premier for Policy and Strategy. And he's excited about this and just saying that he wants his colleagues to see the recording. So please take note, everyone. The recording will be available afterwards.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that.
Go in, I think that's a wonderful point. And then I think as we go into inclusion, talking about it, Jeremy, obviously you've got a lot of experience on the human resources side, including people with low vision. And that's presuming that the person with low vision has accepted that they have a disability, because a lot of people don't. So, but you've got a lot of experience there. What would you like to say about inclusion in terms of the workspace policies around?
So the first, there's two primary ways that we need to look at this. And the one is people coming in for the first time into an organization. So they could have experience and they're being employed into the organization with their disability, in this case, low vision. Or there are people who acquire low vision while they're being employed. And in fact, there's another one, which is those people who have already been employed with low vision at some point, and their vision gets worse. And so it's very important to understand those three, because they have different reactions and they have different responses from employers. And sadly, to this day, we have an unacceptable amount of what's the word, intolerance from an employer point of view to the point of medical boarding.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could literally do a webinar on medical boarding alone.
Yeah.
And
I
we
think
won't.
we need to do that at some
We
stage.
do. And,
Yeah.
and anybody's interested, when at the end there, you can find that webinar I did for Belinda Leibowitz's crowd on that very issue on my website, but we'll give those details later. So there are those three things must be taken into account. And all of it requires the employer to be mature and to be up to date and to be compliant. The big question that's often asked is about disclosure. Should I disclose that I have a disability before? And or even, do I disclose when my vision starts going? Will I not lose my job? Am I not going to be frightened? And
Absolutely.
so, and this is a terrifying experience for people. So on the one hand, I want to apply for a job. I've got experience, I've got education, and I have serious low vision. Do I tell them in my CV that I have it? On the one hand, you argue, sure, because you are covered by the Employment Equity Act, therefore you're a designated group, and you should have no fear but to put it in your CV. Well, let me tell you, in reality, that the response from the employer is not always so benign. And so it's quite often where the employer thinks to themselves, when they see the CV and they see legally blind or low vision, people don't actually say the word low vision. They almost always say legally blind or visually impaired. The employer, knowing nothing about the subject, thinks, oh, I'm not sure they can do this job, and throws it in the bin. And so it's a catch-22 dilemma, that one. It's not catch-22, it's a paradox.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's a lot to be covered in this one, Jen.
Yeah. And recently I've dealt with 3 young people who are employed, but who don't want to disclose. And so they are working so hard behind the scenes to make everything work for them in this situation, because they're scared to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
But the one employee approached us just to come on board, just to come and help. And, just helping the person with shortcuts on their computer, letting them know that they could use an iPad as a magnifier. Those little things of saying, actually, we're going to color code in the tea room. And this is where the question about, adjusting in your home, using the color and contrast, the things that you are familiar with, even shape. If you've got some peripheral vision, shapes can help to label what you want. And the one young girl, we said to her, well, you're in charge of this, so why don't you just say, I really think we need to upgrade some of these notices on the fridge in the office, eat this, leave that, and make them different colors and different shapes. So make them beautiful. You don't have to tell everyone you're visually impaired, but you are then also taking responsibility for your own environment. You're making yourself less stressed in your workspace. So there's also an onus on the person with the vision problem to get some help and say, wow, I didn't know I could do this. This is fantastic. So it's a catch-22 situation.
It is, and it does mean that the individual with low vision has to, at some point, even to disclose to themselves or a neighbor or somebody, to be able to have faith in their own conviction that they might require some assistance, even if they don't want to tell the employer. Because you're going to make yourself ill, literally, with the stress of the thing.
Well, I had cancer because of that. I just think years of stress and not accepting my visual impairment, I landed up with cancer and a lot of complications. For 7 years. I was really ill. And it was in that process, as I was, just coming to terms with it, that I was able to, go back and deal with the stress that a child has who's visually impaired, trying to fit into mainstream schooling, trying to not look blind. I think living with that amount of stress, is not helpful. And I think as awareness grows and spaces are designed and people, so I think inclusion for me is like a bridge. And that's why I've set up See You Are Able, because it's about curable. Our eyesight's not curable, but how we design to be involved is curable. Accessible design is curable.
Absolutely.
And so we got this bridge, and the bridge is between the person with the low vision and then those who are sighted, and how we include ourselves and not blame, but also upskill people to design for those spaces, particularly in your banking, in education apps, there's so many spaces now where it's actually, it's easy to design accessibly. It's really a very sad at this day and age when facilities are not accessible, especially when you think of all our seniors who are losing their sight. These are very wise people. You've been CEOs of companies, whatever, losing their sight, and now suddenly, they're locked out of so many things because of inaccessibility, and they've got so much yet left to give.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think before you get into some classic inclusion and design tips here, I think it's important to understand that, once again, we must not be guilty of a binary ourselves here. So the world isn't just about working and then not working. There is the middle ground, which is we are consumers. And you've alluded to it now with the banking. So we're not just employed with our vision. We are consumers. Not just that we have the right to be consumers, we are consumers. We spend money on every single thing that everyone else does as well. We even buy cars. Just because we don't drive them doesn't mean we don't buy them. And so in every walk of life, there needs to be an embracing of more inclusive consideration from a universal access point of view. And I think that's important because, if the physical access environment was so tainted by people who are obsessed with wheelchair ramps, which is a complete nonsense, because it's not about wheelchair ramps. Ramps are actually easier to navigate than stairs for everybody.
Yes.
And so a hell of a lot of damage has been done with this very narrow obsession with, I've got to make it wheelchair ramp. And not only did they do it badly, but they invariably refused to do it or forgot to do it. And so that's why universal access is important to embrace by everybody, that it's something that everybody will find useful, will be able to use, everybody. And so an ATM should be accessible for everybody, not just for your average person. And it's very exciting, universal access, when you embrace it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're also including people. So, for low vision, as I say, if you design for low vision in the digital space, you're including people with dyslexia who would never put their hands up for a disability either. So covering that space. And then what about third language users? I mean, your screen readers, they're great for third language users too, because sometimes people, when you're reading in your third language, why not just hear it at the same time as reading it? So a lot of your assistive technology apps are actually great for other people. I've shown some people, they just want to listen to a document. They're exhausted now. They've got to go listen to a document to prepare for a meeting. Say, well, just take 2 fingers and swipe, put on your speak screen, 2 fingers swipe down, and there goes your PDFs being read to you, all 30 pages while you drive, or whatever. So I think a lot of the things that are designed for accessibility also have use for everybody in various circumstances.
Well, why, on that note, why don't you tell them about the pad perch and what you designed and why you did it?
Yes, so I ran out of money for assistive technology, and I've relied on a desktop magnifier most of my life. And whenever I was away from my desk, I was very blind. And I was actually involved with a project, I think Michelle's on board here, with the UCT, disability, looking at teacher empowerment for disability inclusion. And I thought, how can I participate? I can't take my screen magnifier with me. So I could take my iPad, and that's when I took some recycled PVC and I made myself a stand. So yeah, it's coming to market. We should, by the end of the year, we will have one ready that is made to order. And thanks to the South African Breweries Foundations and Further Impact, who've helped me on the business side, my product's also at the University of Technology Product Development Station. It's in Bloemfontein and Mangaung. So yeah, the product is coming soon, and that allows people to use their smart devices, the mobile phones, as an electronic magnifier, as well as using free OCR apps to capture text and be able to read it to you. School books, textbooks, whatever, acts like a document stand. Yeah, so in that vein, I'm excited about something I created for myself. I didn't imagine I'd land up with a business, being a business owner. So that's a journey in itself. But yeah, as you say, Jeremy, I'm finding that what I've created for myself and for other visually impaired people, they're people who want it for watching Netflix in bed, or for, they're getting cramps in their arms from holding their smart devices.
Yeah.
So it's actually what you design for a disability is actually can be used for all. And it's,
there was a question. There was a question just now from one of our guests, and it was about tips in the home, etc. And what saddens me is that, because once again that there's this drought of information out there. Some institutions are better equipped than others. Some countries are better equipped than others. And so it's really sad for me when visually impaired people don't know about, and I'm included in that, when we're not even aware of innovative kit that could really benefit somebody. So just a simple thing like a bump on. Now, a bump on is literally what it's just a little rubber, various shapes of it. It's a little rubber button, if you like, that has an adhesive back, and you stick it onto things. And I mean, I use them only because I saw the application when I went to the Royal National Institute of the Blind on a visit. And I saw the incredible application of these things. And so I bought a fistful of these things, and I've used them religiously around the house in various places. So I can identify my plug circuits, which is my geyser, which is my lights, which is my plugs, just because they've got different shapes. My microwave, which is an inaccessible touchscreen microwave, we've put bump-ons next to the buttons, so that for 3 minutes, I just have to feel that bump-on. And I just have to go literally a centimeter to the left and press the button. Same with stop, same with start. On my air fryer, same thing. How long, because I can't see the little clock thing. So, we need to be courageous about exploring, and what you did was terrific. I mean, you made for yourself a device, and I think we all get innovative, and we must spread our wings with this kind of innovation, and then share the stories with people, rather than rely or say, I can't do it. It's very tempting to say, I can't do it, if you haven't had the exposure. I think,
Jeremy, you bring up a good point there. So I think there's a lot of creativity wrapped up in the disability sector. So while sometimes it's very difficult to find a job and say, what can a disabled person do, and fit them in there, but rather say, who's this person with a disability or a struggle? I think that a lot of us have to solve a bunch of problems, some people, before you even get out of bed, or to get out of bed. And so I think there is a lot of creativity wrapped up in the disability sector that we haven't yet tapped into. And I'm talking about problem solving, skills that are required in a standard workplace. But we've had to literally find a different way to see life, to navigate.
Yes.
Which then goes.
That's so important. As you said, problem solving is a genuine skill that is valued, or should be valued, in the workplace. And people with disabilities are famously innovative around, because we have to. To solve problems and to overcome, as you say. When I teach disability awareness, I always talk about, you can do very little about the disability clinically. You can do very little about whatever the problem is, whether it's a hearing or a visual or a physical impairment. But if you can embrace the idea that it's the barriers and the obstacles which are preventing us from achieving something, then you can very quickly realize that you can do nothing about the disability, but you can do a hell of a lot about removing or planning to remove the various obstacles. And here's the real challenge, which is why I'm a little intolerant of, the clinicians and people who are obsessed with definitions and types of disabilities and, clinical definitions of low vision and blindness. Whereas, because we tend to get quite obsessed with the disability and with the minutiae of the disability, which is actually not the important point. The important point is you be more obsessed about the myriad obstacles and barriers in the way of every conceivable permutation of life. If we could get more excited about that, we would have an enormous opportunity for inclusion.
I think, Jeremy, so for me, I see it as like having a fence, a wooden fence. As a person, you know, who's having the struggles, you know, what steps can we put on there so that we can step up to look over the fence? And then how do we say to people who create fences, you know, to say, how do we help them to say, actually, guys, can you just cut off the top here, bring your hacksaw and just make this fence a bit lower for us? And I think it's that combination you're seeing that, you know, there are ways around disability. And I think often, I mean, if there's a person in a wheelchair and they're ramps, they're actually not disabled. So the design of the environment can be the descriptor of the disability.
Absolutely.
So if I can access my banking, if I can swipe left and right with my screen reader and double tap and do all my payments and bills, I've a lovely accessible site, heads up for GovChain. I was able to do all my own SIPSI renewals this year. You know, is that if it's accessible, everyone can get it and no one's disabled. And that's where, you know, getting to the point where I think we probably near to wrapping up, but understand the accessibility around that. And also the value of human dignity. I think when environments are accessible, we're included and seen as people who have struggles, but we're people first. It allows dignity and the dignity of independence. Also, my passion is for seniors, you know, who've been able-bodied and capable all their lives, and now they're retiring and, you know, they're new to this. And how do we create environments to say, don't worry, here's a whole community of people. There's over 15% of us with special needs and sensory processing issues. Come join the club, join the Alien Club. You're not alone. You know, we can do this together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We could do so much more. We could have carried on like this all day. Rian, are there any questions which are coming in? Because we've got to close in a minute or two.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we need to do just this one. And this is when I receive somebody with limited vision into my office or into my home, how do I respond to that person without talking down to that person, without giving information that's unnecessary? I mean, when my wife was pregnant, complete strangers had the freedom to grab a hold of her stomach and touch her stomach because she's pregnant. And people just treated her differently because she was pregnant and touched her in ways that they would never do today. So how do we receive a visually impaired person into our space, make it accessible to them, and without treating them like children?
Jeremy?
Okay, I'll try.
I can answer that. I can answer that.
Well, go for it. Go for it.
I would think, you know, it's about you engage the person. You say, you're coming to us and say, welcome, lovely to see you. Do you need any help to come into the house? What would be helpful for you? As a visually impaired person, I just say, oh, look, that people would stand aside to let me in. I'd say, oh, I'd love to be able to follow you in if you don't mind. That would be easier for me. So you're leaving it completely in the person's court. You treating them with the honor and respect. How is there any way that I could help to make this easier? And hopefully they will generally make you feel really relaxed, not to worry. Or I'd say, I'd love to sit with my back to the light. You know, they will let you know what they need. So ask the person. You're talking to a person, not to a disability.
Yeah, that's a lovely one. I mean, asking, you know, I mean, I love it when people are attentive and they anticipate. So I remember recently somebody said, you know, there are in fact 2 steps ahead of you. And I was so grateful for that because I was strolling into the house. But yeah, to ask, can I help? Rather than there tends to be a bit of sort of panic mode and you grab the arm and you know, don't worry, I'll take you to where you need to be. And it's unnecessary possibly. Ask is the greatest and most empowering thing you can do, is to ask and not be frightened to ask.
Absolutely. So Jeremy, thank you so much for being on board here today with me. I hope it's been fun for the people in participating here online. You can leave comments as well, but is there anything that you'd like to say, a passing comment before Rian just shares a few links?
I think it's great that we're doing this, and I think more of this needs to be done to unveil the mystery around low vision, and to bring into mainstream thinking the fact that there is so much low vision out there, and that we got to do more of this. And I'm pleased that people were interested enough to come along.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks to everyone on board. You're welcome to get hold of Jeremy and I through our websites or social media platforms. And I think, Rian, would you put those in the chat for us?
They're in the chat, so they're available, and we'll send them on email to you too afterwards. Thank you so much for attending.
Yeah, so thanks everybody. We just trust that this will help you realize that, help people not lose hope, even though they're losing their vision. So thanks very much, and all the best to you in your pursuits. And perhaps there's something you can take with you into this week. Even just be grateful for eyesight this week. Right.